So then our next session is promising to be very interesting, and we're waiting for two presenters. The first presenter is going to connect to us via Zoom. That's Farzaneh Badii. And Farzaneh is going to talk about how economic sanctions affect activities of operators, network operators, and IXPs. Farzaneh is going to share with the results of her study, where she looks at how sanctions affected operators in the past. And an interesting thing that she's going to cover on is how sanctions affect the operators that are under sanctions themselves. And since interaction between different elements is interconnection between different elements is very important on the internet, then sanctions also affect unsanctioned companies as well. This session will be a little bit interactive, so if you have any experience as an operator dealing with sanctions, I would like to ask you to share your experience after the presentation. Farzaneh is already online, and I am turning over to her. Over to you, Farzaneh.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. That was a really good introduction, so I'm just going to dive in. This is a part of the a research that is being funded by RIPE NCC. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background on where we are at with the research at this stage, and then we can delve into how sanctions, like some preliminary finding of how sanctions could affect peering. So before we start, I might be wrong in some of these facts or explain something wrong. You can just correct me, and you might want to add to the issues, or you might want to talk about your experience, or you might want to give me written feedback. You can just scan that QR code. You're going to see that QR code throughout the presentation, and then and give me written feedback. The feedback can be anonymous, and also it can be in any language. I will try to translate it. So first, what are economic sanctions? In this research, we consider sanctions as economic sanctions. So there are various types of sanctions that are usually imposed by nation states on other actors or other nation states to change their behavior. And sanctions can include trade restrictions, or more broadly, economic sanctions, travel bans, the freezing of assets, and arms and embargoes. As I mentioned, we focus on economic sanctions. Economic sanctions are not new. They have had implications for the internet since at least late 90s. And the implications for the internet, unfortunately, they have been increasing the past decade. And of course, I'm not going to go through the timeline that I have, but I have presented this timeline during a RIPE meeting, the last RIPE meeting, which you can go and have a look, and also it is on the website, so you can just scan the QR code. So these sanctions, they have started at least from 2010, have started like increasing, and we saw that with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. They have accelerated, nation states have accelerated their pace in sanctioning Russia and also Iran. But also they have created sanction reliefs for certain services online. So in our research, we categorize the impact of sanctions into 3 segments. So there is effect on regional internet registry services, which I have explained in my previous presentation. There is another category of impact, which is inequitable access to number resources because of the indirect consequences of sanctions. And then we have the impact of sanctions on network operators. As I said throughout this presentation, you can scan that QR code and give me your feedback. So now let's talk about impact on network operators. There has been a case of revocation of membership from an internet exchange point of a network operator, a telco of 2 telco operators, which ended up in their de-peering of the internet exchange point. And this was the case that when specific sanctions apply to individuals with formal roles in as like the network operators, whether they are on the board or they're the CEO of the telco operator, and then they are sanctioned by the jurisdiction that the IXP is based in, and then the IXP the IXP has to terminate the peering arrangement because of the risk and the fine that it will incur if it does not do so. Now, if that network operator that has been de-peered is large and serves smaller network operators, those network operators can also be affected. And this might affect the quality of access and create latency. The other problem that could be caused as a result of this de-peering is that network operators that are sanctioned might carry internet traffic of other even non-sanctioned countries. In such a case, the sanctions, the impact of sanction can indirectly actually be imposed on the network operators that are not even subjected to sanction regimes. When revocation of membership from a well-established internet exchange point happens, the individual members of these internet exchange points will likely, and this is likely, stop peering with the sanctioned network to mitigate risk of being fined because of collaborating with a sanctioned network. So in effect, whatever we are doing in peering can be framed as a kind of a transaction, whether it is like payment for peering, or even if you are not doing at a cost and you're just like peering with others, it might be that the legal regime, which is imposing this sanction, consider that a kind of collaboration as a transaction, and it might affect the activities. There is another case that we have come across, and that's the impact on network operators with regard to cache servers. And you might say that, well, that's not specifically peering, but a cache server, you know what a cache server is, I don't have to tell you, but it stores information on a local network. making browsing faster, and they are usually installed in peering locations and ISPs. Trade restrictions and export and import controls and sanctions could impact the availability of these servers. When you are caching data, that could be framed as, that could legally be recognized as a transaction. There were 2 reported cases of Google shutting down its caching servers in 2 Russian ISPs. And unfortunately, we don't have, other than RIPE NCC itself, that is very transparent in how it gets affected by sanctions, and they report it as much as they can. We don't have that kind of transparency in the other in the networks that but Google apparently stated that the reason for disabling those servers was a change in legal practices and also compliance with sanctions. At this stage, we are also guessing that this might be happening in other countries that are in conflict or are dealing with, and their head of states and network operators that are government run might also be affected. For example, there are reports that cache servers are unavailable in Afghanistan, and one hypothesis is that that's because of the sanctions. So if you know of other affected operations, if your operation or other network operators have been impacted by sanctions, or you are guessing that it might be impacted by sanctions, of course, we have to verify that. But just if you can scan that QR code and let us know, then we can discuss it further and we can add it to our reported cases. So what does this have to do with peering in Central Asia? Well, sanction regimes are designed to have transnational effects. They are not limited to one border, especially when jurisdictions that have very well-connected, powerful IXPs and network operators, when they are sanctioned, it can have, and when multiple countries around the world deal with those EU or US entities, they have to comply to a certain point with these sanctions. Your payment system might be affected. The financial system globally is extremely interconnected. It's heavily regulated. And even if not peering with entities in sanctioned countries, you might have contacts with, sometimes unknowingly, their payment systems, and the operator and IXPs might be impacted. You might not be able to pay, or your payment might not be accepted. The other is the so-called sanction-blocked countries that you might have experienced with this. We hear that there are some hypotheses that this has been happening, that operators that are surrounded by sanctioned countries might not be able to peer with their neighbors. And then the ambiguity of sanction regimes creates risk-averse legal practices that would not want to peer with anybody that is sanctioned or is in a sanctioned country or is even dealing with sanctioned countries because of the indirect consequences, or and also like has interactions with sanctioned networks. So if you have had that kind of experience, or if you know of this, or if you think that this is are not applicable, and you can like refute all these arguments, just scan that QR code. But there is hope. It does not mean that we cannot continue peering with the neighboring countries and with sanctioned countries, because, and when I say sanctioned countries, I don't mean sanctioned individuals. With sanctioned individuals, you cannot peer. You cannot do transactions with sanctioned individuals. And but with network operators that are not sanctioned but are based in sanctioned countries, you might be able to peer, and that's because of the two exceptions or waivers that hypothetically and theoretically could bring some relief. For example, the Office of Foreign Assets Control in the US, which is the sanction enforcement agency, it has clarified that in the case of Cuba, which the peering with the telecom operator, Cuba is also a very heavily sanctioned country, but it has been mentioned that there other network operators are allowed to peer, and sanctions don't affect peering. And then there is another waiver that after the EU came up with the sanctions for Russia, they came up with this kind of like, they call it internet carve out. And they mentioned that it's kind of like blunt the effect of sanctions on the internet. And when I say on the internet, I don't mean like everything that is available on the internet. I mean that there are like specific functions that usually is about interconnectivity. So so those sanctions should not apply to a provision of electronic communication services by union telecom operators for the provision of associated facilities and services. So as we can see, this waiver is limited to the EU operators, but at least it might bring some kind of ease of mind to these operators that they can operate in other countries and not indirectly affect peering. Okay, so and you can tell us about your experience. You can also send me an email and just give me feedback about this and also about this presentation. But we are at this stage, we are only canvassing the field and looking for case studies and what has happened because of sanction to peering and interconnectivity globally. And that's about it. I think I am done. Am I on time? Do I have some time? No, I think I'm good.
We still have some time for questions, Farzaneh.
Perfect. So if you have any
есть немножко времени для вопросов.
Yes, we do have some time for questions. So do you have any questions, Farzaneh? And if you, for example, you recognize situations which Farzaneh mentioned in her presentation, and you would like to speak out, you're welcome.
Thank you. Hello, Farzaneh. Thank you so much for your great presentation. This is Milad from Iran, and I just want to know that did you have any study about the impacts of sanctions on specific countries like Iran, and is there any, documents or article that we can find these sort of impacts?
Yes. So thank you, Milad, and good to see you. And so basically, yes, we are focusing on we focus globally on like various countries that are impacted by sanctions. But we also the scope of research is internet number resources, but we want to, as I mentioned, we want to also look at the implications of sanctions on network operators and see how that also affects interconnectivity. And we have, so we did an update about that kind of like research. The timeline is also maybe not too comprehensive, but it does mention how sanctions affected access to certain services and internet number resources in Iran and in Syria and a few other sanctioned countries, and also like the effect of sanction on peering. So yes, you can go. I'm going to also publish a blog about the state of the research after this on RIPE Lab, which you can have a look. If you have case studies, or if you have instances that are like relevant to access to IP addresses and allocation of IP addresses, and how that affects certain individuals that are not sanctioned, but they are based in those countries, then you can just also report that as well.
Thank you.
Есть еще вопросы?
Any more questions? If you recognized any cases or situations which were shared in the presentation when you didn't have a chance to peer with anybody located in those places, you can contact even after this event. There is an archive. You can upload the presentation and scan those codes which were presentations. Some of the codes will have more information, about the study which was performed. And also there is a barcode, where you use and share your cases, share your story, which will help to continue the study. Thank you very much. It was nice seeing you.
Thank you.
И наш следующий участник Александр
Our
Ильин.
next presenter, Alexander Ilin. Alexander is known to everyone. He's a technical director of Moscow Exchange Point, and Alexander will share secrets of stability and reliability of platforms. Thank you very much to the organizers and for inviting us. My presentation will be in Russian because most of the people understand Russian here, and it will be interesting to some extent. I'm a technical director and mainly share about technical achievements and innovations, but I will try to make this presentation interesting, since I understand that the audience here is not doesn't have in-depth interest in IX problems, but IX sort of construction and creation, it's a long-term task. And I am working already for more than 20 years. After founding the company, I'm working almost 25 years, from engineer to technical director. So I was participating everything from ground zero. So briefly, what we do have right now. So IX is now built or created in Russia. It connects 10 cities in Russia. And city, that means it's independent XPs. So inner city communication is not within the sphere of our interest. So communication between cities, it's a separate issue, separate operators, separate expensive. It's a transit operators, but we do cooperate with them, and we do have a possibility to provide combined services. So our the terabit is the speed higher than 5 terabits of the total traffic. And we are testing new equipment all the time because the speeds are growing and demand like strong and reliable equipment which supports that. As for the structure of the content, so who is connected to IX? This is the picture for most IXs is quite typical, and there is nothing unique here. And we have interesting and complex platform. It unites four global pillars. A main platform is IX, which where the data exchange happens. Several years ago, we launched TV platform, which is called Media Logistics. That is the TV content delivery platform. And if we talk about additional functions, which turned out to be in demand during pandemic and after pandemic, it's Internet platform. It's a specialized platform for the isolated data exchange, which allows to protect from attacks and to organize interaction between players, and allows to create some isolated, segregated, environment. And historically, we work with DNS systems. We have great experience. We have quite big DNS structure, and I will tell you all about it. Data escrow, it's has to do with DNS, so we'll talk about it later. As for media logistics, a couple of words. It's 600 channels, TV channels. It's a big key clients. We have Kazakh Telecom among our clients. They receive content. So this platform it made us rethink all the approaches to the exchange points. It allowed us to understand, to pay more attention to the quality of the services, because any fallout of the frame causes the loss of image. That is why there are high sort of demands or requirements for reliability. So Instanet, it unites a lot of cities or connects a lot of cities, and it allows at a second tier C model to create Ethernet and create isolated platform for the market players to create this overlapping networks. And we tested a high uh, uh, so we tested, the system which allows actually to transfer or to transit a big packages, because sometimes it happens that sometimes we need to put more stuff within the network. So if we talk about DNS, geography is quite wide. That includes practically whole globe. And in addition to Russia, it services about 10 billion requests per day. And this network was created based on the SLA, requirement. It's 100% now. And during the whole operational sort of life cycle, we never had any failures. It is due to several DNS blocks and newcast technologies in different regions. Traffic really is provided through one address and allows to regulate data transfer to this or that node. So it has also a tech protection system or security system which allows to withstand any threats, which could occur. In a couple of words, besides DNS infrastructure, we also have so-called data escrow services. Mainly, they're targeting registry of domain registries, and these systems are close, very close, because they allow to add to the DNS structure which exists and allows to concentrate on the redundant systems or backup systems, which DNS big areas do consist, and provide reliability of this structure or system. of a backup registry. So topology, it's a funny picture, of course. This is like a Medusa. It's not one Medusa, it's just two jellyfishes or Medusas, you know. So if we go into the technical sort of explanation, so the basics of topology is the two nucleus structure. It located in energy independent points. And I'm just telling you about Moscow, where we have the most central platform. And here we have high level of protection of exchange from any external impact. If we look at Medusa legs, as we say, you know, each leg or it's a data center with equipment. And they have backup channels for in each nucleus, and failure of any line of communication does not cause any damage. So even if one nucleus fails, you know, it is not going to impact the system. It's the multi-layered redundancy, you know, so multi-layered reserve system. So the upper Medusa, everybody knows that Moscow, in Moscow, we have one of the central MTS-9, and this platform has a great number of operators, communication operators, and operation providers, and it allows to provide maximum backup. And this approach allowed us to build network in such a way so we understand how we load each channel, and we can forecast where we will have expenditures or expenses and so on, and costs associated with different channels. So and this is just a short, brief slide on how do we approach not creation the central exchange point, but we do a lot of research how to build reliable big exchange centers. So we use the loop topology, we use specialized protocols which allow to reach fast reactions to any situations. Of course, it's clear there are failures, ruptures, and some problems with the data centers, and we have to respond to that very quickly. And with that purpose, we build such. So we do create such complex structures. Talking about the reliability of the network, and it's one of the criteria which allow us to reach high quality availability of the platform, reserved or backup structure. We take into consideration any uh, uh, failures, and that allows us to find a way out for future solutions. So the achievements we had during recent years, we don't really see any global problems, and we don't foresee any global problems. And the news of the last months, one of the nucleuses was moved from one data center to the other one. That was the most complicated operation, and it was executed without any breakage in communication. It was just 30 seconds. It was a well-coordinated time, and the TV people did notice it because it was 3 in the morning, but it was agreed upon ahead of time. So that is why we took into consideration this sort of outage. So the reliability requirements, the new services have to be introduced very quickly. We have to account for all the lines and equipment. These tasks are in the process of being resolved, and will be resolved. If we talk about exchange point, one of the characteristics, key characteristics, is whenever the new player comes in, it provides physical location of their equipment. And if they exchange or substitute this equipment, it has to be done 24/7 and very fast. It's one of the other sort of requirements for the reliability. Fast monitoring, and um, we had a lot of tasks in this sphere, and it works really well for us. And also we pay some time for testing also. As for the nucleus of the platform, it's for the core, the platform. There's also such thing as route server. I can boast now that in Russia we created it's one of the first route servers, in the world exchange points were created. The Russian point was developed as an exchange point of many, many different operators. When European exchange points had a limited number of operators and they had just peerings between them. So we had this route server which reached the peak of its performance. These are just two working platforms, one with one and a backup one, and which introduced mechanisms allowing us to develop this platform and introduce new services to it. And what and also which IX absolutely has to have, it's a client cabinet or client room, client interface, whatever you call it. And also, and if I show you everything, what we have here, it will take us forever to look at this because it has the whole range of technical parameters and different uh, uh, data analysis capabilities, troubleshooting analysis. It's a lot of help, assistance to all the participants. It's one of the ideas which we implemented. One of the first ones, it was the instrument for peering. So we came up with a technology which it happens that sometimes you have a language barrier or any other obstacles, external obstacles do not or prevent to create conditions for interaction between operators, because operators have to agree on peering, cut the deal on peering. So, and we created a platform which allows you to choose, to select whom do you want to communicate with, make a short message, it will be automatically translated into English and will be resent to people who are involved in peering. You don't have to look for the context. You don't have to try to understand who's responsible for peering in that company. So what we made, this instrument became very used, especially when a new player or a new client comes in to a platform and there are like 500 operators and you have to have a separate talk, do a one-on-one talk with somebody. So this is our lab, we tested 400 gigabit ports. It was a year ago or 2 years ago, but it's paused now, this task, is because there is no market demand in terms of the client use. But I think that in the future, we will definitely install them and we will use them, but everything works. So here I will not talk a lot about it. As a lab, we work on the sort of attack protection, and we introduced some mechanisms, and quite successfully the service is becoming in demand, and many clients use protection or security instruments developed by us. Also, we have another task which has been implemented by us and with partnership, within the partnership of Uzbek company, we created exchange point for our partners. We created it's a already product, like off-shelf sort of product with a monitoring system with parameters for the resources, but we helped them implement the system or commission the system, but the partner was involved in development of IX in terms of interaction, search for clients, client search, and interaction with the clients directly. And it was a successful project. It's still self sort of existent. It works, and we continue providing support to this project. It says that's within our within our sphere of our responsibility. That's it. If you have any questions, I'm ready to answer them.
Есть вопросы к Александру?
Questions to Alexander?
Александр,
No
спасибо большое
questions.
за
Alexander, thank you
презентацию.
very much for your
Аплодисменты,
presentation.
пожалуйста.
We have a short break, 10 minutes. And after that, we will have 3 short blitz presentations. And Ban will, no break. Let's continue. Okay.